When it comes to human history, war is as common as blue skies and green plants. But what about the battles waged before history was even recorded? A new scientific study has brought widespread attention to the possibility that thousands of years ago, there was a fight that lasted centuries. It was a war for the future, and it was a war that shaped who we are today. Experts uncover evidence of an ancient war that lasted 100,000 years. Evolution has always favored the fittest, even humans from eras long, long ago. Even before world economies, competition between different groups of people was fierce, and that usually took the form of war on a scale we can't imagine today. When thinking of war from centuries ago, it's easy to assume that these were more like petty fights between tribes. But they were far more brutal, and some might go as far as to call them genocidal. The makeup of our world looks a lot different because of this fighting. The problem for historians, however, is piecing together exactly what this fighting looked like. One of the earliest wars recorded took place around Southwest Asia between the nations of Elam and Sumer, around 2700 BC. But just because it's the earliest record doesn't mean it was the first war to take place. People fought before people recorded the fighting. And since this ancient history was never written down by scribes and scholars, uncovered relics from millennia ago are the only way to know what happened prehistorically. Recent discoveries shed light on the deadly war between two unlikely prehistoric candidates. Let's rewind 70,000 years when a supervolcano called Mount Oba erupted in what is today known as Sumatra, Indonesia. This is believed to have caused an environmental domino effect that ended in the worldwide ice age and set the war into motion. By working together, a select group of Homo sapiens found warmth despite the chill. They survived the ice age by forming tribes, and after becoming strong and efficient enough, they left what is now known as Africa and ran into trouble. It was then that the Homo sapiens realized they weren't alone in the world. They had fought through an icy hell to survive the past generation, but the struggle was far from over. As they were making a westward journey from the Near East to Europe, they ran into Neanderthals, a distant cousin. Named after the Neander Valley in present-day Germany, Neanderthals had left Africa a while before humans, and let's just say they weren't happy to see their distant cousins follow suit. These weren't your average cavemen. Although Neanderthals are depicted as oafish in cartoons, they were actually pretty smart. Anatomically speaking, Neanderthals weren't all that different from humans. They were shorter, stockier, and perhaps less philosophical, but our brains are the same size. This made them mighty competitors for Homo sapiens. With their big brains and hard bodies, Neanderthals could easily cooperate, which meant working together toward common goals. Neanderthals were pros at hunting in groups. They were at the top of the food chain for hundreds of years. War, for them, would be just another day of hunting. On top of that, Neanderthals created their own tools out of bone and stone. They had complicated designs and were effective against wild animals. Sure, the tools would make fine work of fleshy Homo sapiens, the Neanderthals felt prepared to fight. After all, Homo sapiens in their territory spelled disaster. Well before their species was threatened by wandering Homo sapiens, the biggest issue Neanderthals faced was overpopulation. They were leaders in their ecosystem, but too many of them could have meant not enough resources. Contending for game wasn't an option, there would need to be a fight. French paleontologist Marcellin Boule proposed in 1912 that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens battled violently for resources. As their enemies bombarded them, Neanderthals contended with disease and climate issues. They were fighting a war on several fronts. Evidence uncovered later showed just how brutal the fighting was. In 1979, a special skeleton was found in Saint-Césaire, France. It dated back at least 35,000 years, and its skull was healed from a fracture. This has led us to believe he was speared in the head during battle. Of course, wars don't last thousands of years if they're a lopsided affair. It wasn't just the Neanderthals who sustained injuries. Archaeologists have seen the same kinds of injuries sustained in both species. In other words, both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens fought with equal vigor and dealt crushing blows. Eventually, something had to give. Even just 50,000 years ago, the battle between Neanderthals and sapiens raged on, But one of them was closing in on the win. Interbreeding was hurting the Neanderthals' numbers, and Homo sapiens continued advancing their weapon technology. Things were grim. Neanderthals eventually lost, but they actually had the upper hand for most of the war. They were physically stronger than their enemies, but humans' advanced weaponry that struck from a distance helped them clinch the win. We wouldn't be here today if the humans hadn't won, but some historians wish the two species could have coexisted. Instead of competing against each other to survive, they could have worked together, which would give humanity a very different look in the modern era. And recent evidence actually proves there might have been more overlap than people thought. Scientists have long suspected that there was interbreeding between ancient humans. The chances of uncovering proof of this? Slim at best, or so the experts thought. Then researchers in a cave in Siberia stumbled upon a tiny fragment of bone. Initially, the team didn't even realize that this came from a hominin, a term that just means all the species regarded as human. But soon an incredible story began to unfold. Although the bone languished in obscurity for years, one intrepid researcher eventually found it and began to inspect it. The Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology's Viviane Sloan also decided to try to extract DNA from the artifact. And what she found has turned decades of research on its head. Now, we have some exciting new truths about how ancient humans made their way in the world. Why was the bone so important? Well, we know that a number of different species walked the earth before, and even alongside modern humans. This particular discovery marked the first time that a direct hybrid had been unearthed, however. It was history in the making, and so it's no wonder that researchers reacted to the news with delight. And there's an incredible tale behind this fragment of bone, a story all about the human race. Today, all people belong to the same species, Homo sapiens, which first emerged approximately 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. But as prehistory buffs know, that hasn't always been the case. The earliest known human ancestors were actually the Australopithecines. These were a number of different species that were capable of both climbing and walking on two legs. According to research, these distant relatives of Homo sapiens first emerged in Africa more than 4 million years ago. And, of course, they would have looked very different from how we appear today. Next, scientists believe the various species of Homo began to emerge. At first, they evolved longer legs that were better suited to running and walking. Then their brains began to grow. And these adaptations may have signaled a change in behavior, as these early humans began to hunt and take on a more carnivorous diet. Then, about 700,000 years ago, the species known as Homo heidelbergensis emerged in Africa and Eurasia. And experts have suggested that these hominins were much more like modern people in their appearance, laying the groundwork for how their descendants would evolve. They acted pretty differently from their predecessors, too. Apparently, Homo heidelbergensis was likely more intelligent than those who had come before. Members used advanced tools and honed their hunting techniques, for example. Some even believe that individuals may have teamed up to bring down larger animals, which indicates a degree of social cohesion. But despite Homo heidelbergensis's many strengths, the species still died out. You should know, though, that Homo heidelbergensis didn't disappear from the earth without leaving a trace. Far from it, in fact. An estimated 390,000 years ago, in the Middle Pleistocene era, a number of different species began to split off from this common ancestor. And from these branches, modern humans would ultimately emerge. Of course, the story of mankind is one of rich and varied evolutionary history, with many species of hominin thought to have coexisted alongside one another over the millennia. And they didn't just tolerate one another's presence. For years, researchers have known that a degree of interbreeding took place between these different groups of early humans. Until the German discovery, however, no one could prove this for sure. And, yes, although it's often said that members of different species cannot successfully interbreed, this is far from an established fact. As Forbes' Michael Marshall pointed out in a 2018 article, while a mule born from a donkey and a horse is always infertile, the outcome of other interspecies pairings could vary from animal to animal. Apparently, it's all to do with DNA. You see, a mule is the product of a horse, which has 64 chromosomes, mating with a donkey, which has 62. So, the offspring of the two animals ends up with 63 chromosomes, an odd number. And, naturally, this has consequences. As the mechanics of sexual reproduction require an egg and a sperm to each contain 50% of an animal's chromosomes, this non-even number means the creature has a defective genetic code, one that prevents it from reproducing further. But some primate species, such as gorillas and orangutans, share identical numbers of chromosomes. Some researchers have theorized, then, that it could be easier for them to produce healthy offspring. There's even evidence that bonobos and chimpanzees have interbred at various points throughout their history. Interestingly, this theory could also explain why some big cats are able to successfully interbreed. The much-touted liger never actually occurs in nature, as lions and tigers' natural habitats are typically too far apart for mating to occur. But several zoos around the world now house examples of this large creature, which, as an adult, is usually bigger than either of its parents. Ligers can also go on to produce their own offspring. And, crucially, early humans are also thought to have shared the same number of chromosomes. That meant the different species were able to interbreed. Experts believe that Homo sapiens began mating with Homo neanderthal not long after migrating from Africa and spreading out around the world. That's why most modern humans from Asia and Europe have about 2% Neanderthal DNA. Perhaps you noticed this in your own genetic test? But Homo sapiens wasn't just coupling with Homo neanderthal. Apparently, members of the species also mated with those from another branch of the human family tree. They're known as the Denisovans. The Denisovans are a fairly recent discovery in the field of evolutionary studies. In fact, definite evidence of their existence has only come to light in the 21st century. In 2010, a team of scientists, also from the Max Planck Institute, announced the results of their latest research. After having analyzed a tooth and a finger bone found in the Altai Mountains in Siberia, they had found evidence of a new species of early human. Pleased with their monumental breakthrough, the researchers dubbed the species Denisova in honor of the cave in which the specimens were found. But aside from what could be interpreted from DNA, little was known about this human ancestor. Then, in 2012, research at the same site in Siberia turned up another small fragment of bone. At first, researchers lumped the unremarkable fragment in with the countless animal fossils that were also retrieved from the cave. And it wasn't until years later, when the University of Oxford's Samantha Brown took a closer look, that its true nature was revealed. Tasked with cataloging the artifacts, Brown analyzed the proteins inside this bone and realized that it had come from an ancient human. After that, the bone passed to Sloan, a paleogeneticist. And in order to learn more about this mystery hominin, she, too, began to investigate the DNA contained within the fragment. But in the end, she found more than anyone was expecting. At first, it seems, the bone did not appear to be anything particularly remarkable. Just 1 inch in length, it is believed to have come from a teenage girl who was probably around 13 years of age. It's thought that she died approximately 90,000 years ago, when the Denisovans populated this small corner of the Altai Mountains. But when Sloan analyzed the DNA present in the bone's mitochondria, she was in for a big surprise. As anyone with a keen interest in genetics knows, this type of cellular structure contains material that a child inherits only from their mother. And in this case, it indicated that the teenager was descended from a female Neanderthal. This was already very exciting, Sloan told National Geographic in 2018. It only got more exciting when we started looking at the nuclear DNA. Our knowledge of genetics tells us that this material is passed down through both the male and female lines, and it allowed scientists to learn more about the father of this ancient teenager. That's when we realized there was something a bit funky about this bone, Sloan continued. In fact, the results were so shocking that she was initially convinced she had made a mistake. Had she somehow skewed the data without realizing it? Or had the sample perhaps been corrupted in the laboratory? Eventually, though, Sloan realized that there was no mistake. Although the teenager's mother had Neanderthal DNA, her father, according to the analysis, had been a Denisovan. And that wasn't all. While analyzing the bone fragment, the paleogeneticist also discovered that the girl's genetic makeup was remarkably varied as a whole. But what does that mean in layman's terms? Well, it's all to do with a concept known as heterozygosity. Essentially, if your parents were closely related, let's say, second cousins, for example, the amount of heterozygosity present in your genes would be relatively meager. If you were the result of interspecies breeding, on the other hand, those levels would be sky high. Make sense? And with the bone found in Denisova Cave, it was definitely a case of the latter. Speaking to National Geographic, computational biologist Richard E. Green explained of the ancient DNA, it's heterozygous out the wazoo. That's really what nails it. Amazingly, Sloan had discovered one of the holy grails of human evolution. A first-generation child born of interbreeding between species. We knew from previous studies that Neanderthals and Denisovans must have occasionally had children, together Sloan told London newspaper The Evening Standard in 2018. But I never thought we would be so lucky as to find an actual offspring of the two groups. And at Harvard University, geneticist David Reich agreed. It's amazing to be able to find something like this, Reich said to National Geographic. It seemed unlikely that we would be able to catch it happening in the act, an individual that's really the product of a first-generation hybrid. The discovery was so fortuitous, in fact, that it has raised questions about how common such interbreeding really was. It is striking that we find this Denisovan Neanderthal child among the handful of ancient individuals whose genomes have been sequenced, the Max Planck Institute's Svante Pääbo told the Evening Standard. Neanderthals and Denisovans may not have had many opportunities to meet. But when they did, they must have mated frequently, much more so than we previously thought. Although it's possible that the discovery was little more than a lucky break, researchers are considering other explanations. One of these is that the two species of hominin actually interacted and interbred with each other on a regular basis. And if this theory is true, it would turn our previous understanding of the ancient world on its head. But the bone of the teenager who has been dubbed Denny isn't the only evidence that lends support to this hypothesis. Up to 2018, scientists had only conducted genetic research on a relatively small number of ancient humans, 23, to be precise. Still, even within this tiny sample, there were at least two specimens that showed evidence of interbreeding between species. Take the individual known as OS1, for instance. Identified by their lower jaw, this member of Homo sapiens is believed to have walked the planet about 37,000 years ago. But despite their relatively recent place on the human family tree, they were found to be carrying Neanderthal DNA. And we are not talking about the very distant past, either. According to a report published in the journal Nature in 2015, OS1's Neanderthal forebears may have been alive only 4 to 6 generations previously. If interbreeding between species had only occurred sporadically, Pääbo reasoned, discoveries such as this should be few and far between. On top of that, the study from the Max Planck Institute noticed something else about Denny. Apparently, the teenager's father also had Neanderthal DNA, combined with his Denisovan genes. And that's incredibly revealing. According to Pääbo, it suggests that these groups, when they met, mixed quite freely with each other. Previously, most researchers assumed that interactions between these different groups had happened only infrequently. So, how do these latest developments alter our view of ancient humans and their evolving society? Speaking to National Geographic, Reich explained, it qualitatively transforms and changes our understanding of the world. And that's really exciting. Of course, there could be other explanations as to why a first-generation hybrid has already appeared in such a limited sample size. In Green's opinion, caves such as the one in the Altai Mountains could simply have been popular meeting points for ancient humans, bringing sampling bias into the equation. Or, as the specialist neatly put it in an interview with National Geographic, they're the singles bars of the Pleistocene Eurasia. But was it simply proximity that inspired the Denisovans and the Neanderthals to interbreed? Or was something else at play? Well, according to the University of Tübingen's Katarina Harvati Papathiotaro, such cross-species interactions could have formed a vital part of survival. Speaking to New Scientist, the German academic explained, human groups were very small and vulnerable to drastic mortality. And as more information emerges, scientists hope to solve some of the mysteries that have long puzzled those who study human evolution. Did the Denisovans and Neanderthals quickly die out as Homo sapiens began to thrive? Or were they simply assimilated into the dominant species? In an interview with New Scientist, Princeton University's Joshua Key admitted that Denny's DNA points to the second of those assumptions, although we are a long way from a definitive answer. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.